Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about the relevance of North Korea in today's global dynamic, Kim Jong-un's struggle for attention. Our guest for the show is Carl Baker, Senior Advisor of Pacific Forum. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Be here, Jay. Always fun to talk about North Korea. It has been around for a long time, and its image has changed over the years. And now, living in this new age of great power dynamics, it's become yet another fascinating piece of the global puzzle.
Yeah, the fast-moving global puzzle. But North Korea is a rogue state. We should talk about what that means. And we need to follow its moves and threats to Asia and beyond. But right now, Carl, it seems quiet because of all the noise from other areas in the world. The news is filled and it isn't filled with North Korea. So, for a guy who wants all the attention he can get, how does this affect Kim Jong-un?
Let's start first with the rogue state. It's a rogue state because I don't know. I'm not so sure it's a rogue state anymore in everyone's terminology. In the past, when we had a global definition of good governance and rule of law and individual dignity, that rogue state maybe had a meaning. What is the meaning if you're in Pyongyang of a rogue state these days, or if you're in Beijing, or if you're in Moscow? I don't know that North Korea qualifies as a rogue state.
So, what about a pariah? Let me change words on you. Is it a pariah state, and do they recognize themselves as a pariah state?
No, I don't think they do. They never did. And I think, and again, I'm making the point here is that Moscow certainly doesn't consider them a pariah state. I mean, is it because they voted against the UN General Assembly resolution of condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine? There were only a couple other states that joined in that fight, but you know who they are. What is a rogue state these days? I think that it's easy to use that term and say, yeah, North Korea, Iran, they're rogue states. But I think in today's dynamic, in the multi-polarizing world that we live in, rogue has a whole different meaning, I think. And pariah is another one of those words that it's easy to throw around. And 10 years ago, everybody would say, yeah, you're right, and wouldn't question it. But I think today, there's some question of what makes it a rogue state, what makes it a pariah state, because they've developed a nuclear weapon outside the confines of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Well, so has Pakistan, so has India, so has Israel, so has well, it's probably the only ones, I guess. I shouldn't exaggerate, but certainly, that's one of the criteria that was often used. But nowadays, certainly that doesn't bother anybody in Moscow, and to some extent, it doesn't bother anybody in China. So so that to make the first point. Second point is, I think Kim Jong-un has all the attention he wants. What he doesn't want necessarily is attention from the United States. And the reason that is the case is because he has a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin. And he has a lot of attention from Vladimir Putin, to the point, as you know, where they have brought a lot of North Koreans in to fight the war if not in Ukraine, certainly in Russia, defending Russian territory that was taken by Ukraine.
Let's dwell on that for a minute. I saw in the news that if you wondered about his contribution of troops to Russia's battlefield in Ukraine, he's sending more troops. There have been various stories about the efficacy, the strength of those troops, but here he goes again. And I wonder if you could describe to us, Carl, why? What is he doing? Why is Putin asking him to do this? What effect do they have? Why send more troops? Is this part of the end game? In the throes of this quote negotiation for a settlement. Why is this happening?
Whatever the end game is here, I'm not sure that it's part of that, but certainly it's part of Putin's effort to legitimize that war And certainly North Korea has provided not only manpower, but they've also provided equipment. And so this is part of the whole thing about what is a rogue state today, because for Moscow, North Korea has done exactly what Moscow needed, was someone else to support the effort. They've gotten munitions, they've gotten equipment, they've gotten manpower to prosecute the war. I mean, it's the same as when they had the Wagner group come in and use them like chattel as feeder for the destruction. So I think that the North Koreans have very much been used in that. And from the North Korean perspective, what you've seen come out of North Korea is they're saying, well, this is good. This is good because the troops are battle tested and they're learning how to prosecute a war in today's environment. So they see it as very useful as a good training exercise, to be a little bit cynical. So I think that for both sides, they've seen it as advantageous to include North Korea as an ally, basically, of Russia in this process. And there's even been talk about a North Korean Russian alliance, with all the nuance associated with that term. I don't think there is a formal alliance, but there certainly is a strong partner.
What's the quid pro quo? He sends troops in. A lot of them are getting killed or wounded or maimed or what have you. What is Putin doing for North Korea?
Well, I mean, to start with, he's managed to end the sanctions committee at the United Nations Security Council, something that had been in place for nearly 20 years. Uh, that's gone because because Russia vetoed the continuation of that sanctions committee. So
Mhm.
it's given North Korea an opportunity to get more goods into North Korea. It's been able to continue its nuclear weapons program, its weapons development program. It's been able to uh, import luxury goods for the elite. So it's very much been a part of this broader multipolarization that we keep talking about. That these countries are developing a network, an economic network that can almost laugh in the face of U.S. sanctions or Western sanctions, because they're building a separate market system. And don't forget, China is part of this too. China has always sort of looked the other way at what North Korea was doing in terms of importing weapons and other things that were supposed to be sanctioned under UN Security Council resolutions. So China is certainly playing a part in this multipolarization, this broadening of a rogue state market, if you want to use that rogue state term.
It's just another indicator that the old order, call it the liberal world order, call it the old UN, um, the the post-war time when the U.S. set the standard, is like over. People cross borders and they attack their neighbors. And what I find interesting, and you made this comparison, Carl, is that these are troops from one country fighting the battle of another country. And it reminds me, of course, Prigozhin is kind of an example of that, although he was Russian before his regrettable demise. What shall I say? Um, on the other hand, look at Iran. Iran is using proxy troops. And I know that's different, in the logic of it, it's different, but it sounds the same in terms of one country using troops to advance its interests in another country. And the troops aren't from the first country. It's like it's a kind of reverse proxy, what's happening with North Korea. But clearly you have multiple examples now of these troops that show up and fight somebody else's battle. And I don't, maybe you can tell me historically whether that was happening before or whether it's increasing now.
I mean, I'm sure you can find historic examples of that happening. Certainly in a global system that encourages that sort of behavior, where I mean, if you go back to the colonial era, of course there were proxies in the sense that that colonized forces were being used to fight the colonizers' battles. I mean, I think that this is historically the case that has happened on a fairly regular basis. And again, this is back to what Secretary of State Rubio has said is the normal world order. The unitary unipolar moment, the single hegemon was an aberration to the normal order. And now we're simply returning to that order. So, so I think that yeah, sure, this has happened in the past. It's not unique to the modern world. It's something that happened probably not in the, as you say, in the era of the liberal rules-based order that we experienced since 1945.
But the liberal-based order, since we experienced before, was, in my view, more rational, more ordered. When you have this sort of cross-border thing and the attack on sovereignty, you really have more chaos in the world, and
Well,
and that chaos is troubling because it could always expand. It could always light a fire. Do you agree?
yeah, of course. I mean, you no longer have the 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 same sort of mindset. If you go back and look, I mean, at the classic example of when Iraq invaded Kuwait. I mean, there was a single moment in 1991 when everyone in the world said that cannot be allowed to happen. That those days are gone. And some, of course, say the United States started the fire when they invaded Iraq in 2000, what it was, 2001 or whatever, 2002. And others say, well, this is what happened when we let Putin take Crimea in 2014. So yeah, it's a slow erosion of a rules-based order that everyone acknowledged the sovereignty of individual states was one of the key features of that order. And those days are gone. And certainly it's a much more dangerous and risky world order that we're moving toward.
And moving toward it means that somebody irresponsible, some irresponsible nation state could actually start another world war. I mean, a shooting war like before, because there's nobody there to say no.
There's no consensus what no means, a more accurate way to say it, because I mean, if you again, if you look at what's happening from the multipolar centers, if you look at the two current examples, what happened in Gaza and what happened in Ukraine, it's a completely different perspective on what you see when you look at those two incidents. If you come from Russia and you from Moscow and you look at what happened in Gaza, was that not naked aggression by a state on another state? Or was it, and certainly when you look at it from the United States and from Europe in Ukraine, well, let's say Europe nowadays, I guess, when you look at what happened in Ukraine, it was naked aggression by Russia, completely different perspective. And I think this is the thing that we need to start getting used to when we start accepting the idea that we are moving to this multipolarity. You don't have these common features of promotion of democracy, freedom of expression, rule of law, individual dignity at play anymore when you look at what's happening between states and the international system.
Yeah, and sometimes democracies or former democracies engage in accelerating, creating incendiary maneuvers that actually make it worse. And that's a surprise, especially with the United States. So you mentioned that she is kind of well, he turns the other way about what North Korea is doing. Excuse me. Putin likes it, encourages it. Even though he's under an arrest warrant, he flies to North Korea and makes a deal with Kim Jong-un. And next time you look, the troops are in Russia. So Putin is definitely in some kind of affirmative relationship with Kim Jong-un. But then Trump, I just wonder about Trump. Trump is one of those represents what used to be a democratic country, and he is creating all kinds of consternation. He is agreeing with Putin, who uh, believes you can attack your neighbor. Trump is breaking down the liberal world order. But the question I put to you is, what is Trump doing affirmatively with Kim Jong Un? There were love letters. Remember that? It wasn't too long ago in the first administration. Love letters. But what is Trump doing now? Or maybe Trump is so busy disrupting things in Europe and, of course, the U.S., that he doesn't have time or inclination to play in Asia and to play with Kim Jong Un. What are your thoughts?
I think that's accurate. I think that there has not been a lot of thought given to the North Korea issue. If it's a problem or not, I'm reluctant to say at this point. But I think in the United States, there has been little thought given to North Korea. And maybe the way I attack this is say, but North Korea has changed from what happened in 2017, 2018, when Trump went through the little rocket man. We're going to eliminate North Korea as a state to love letters. North Korea has changed. It doesn't need attention from the United States anymore. It doesn't need the United States as a buffer because in in 2018, North Korea was worried about China dominating North Korea. And so it saw a relationship with North Korea or with North Korea's relationship with the United States as beneficial to North Korea. Today, North Korea doesn't really need that relationship to buffer itself against China because it has the relationship with Russia. And now North Korea can actually play China and Russia against each other.
It also sounds like the U.S. is simply not as powerful, at least not in Asia as it was, and therefore he can turn his back on us.
He can well afford to ignore the United States because China has become the dominant power in Asia. And so yeah, it doesn't really benefit North Korea to engage with the United States. It still continues to use United States as the sort of boogeyman that allows him to suppress his own people and continue to develop his nuclear and military capabilities. But he certainly doesn't fear the United States like he did, or want to build a better relationship with the United States.
Yeah, let's talk about his economy versus his missiles and his aggressive maneuvers hither and yon. I mean, I think starvation still exists in North Korea. The economy is not robust in any way. People are suffering, but they have no information about how that works on a relative basis against other countries, and the success of other countries in feeding their people. And of course, I want to be the first to tell you, Carl, that they never got any aid from USAID, never ever. So they don't miss that at all. Anyway, they're still starving. Furthermore, I read that the troops that Kim Jong Un sent to Russia didn't have enough food, and they were starving on the battlefield. They didn't have any medical care, starving and sick and wounded on the battlefield. It's really interesting that you send those troops into the maw without really giving them any support. And Russia didn't give them any support either. Russia was just sending them to their deaths. That's one thing. So people at home, they're not getting much food either. At the same time, Kim Jong Un is still interested in developing missiles, intercontinental missiles, nuclear missiles, and he still fires them off once in a while. I don't know if it's more frequently or less frequently these days. And in large part, trying to threaten South Korea. We should talk about that. He's spending a lot of money and resource on developing weapons when query, does he really need to do that? Is he really under attack from the US? Would the US ever attack him? Does he need to have nuclear weapons? Or is this just chibai to try to fool the submissive citizens of North Korea?
Certainly, that's part of the equation for him, I think. But also, I mean, his having nuclear weapons. in today's world gives him a very strong feeling of strength of position when he works with Japan, South Korea, and the United States. So certainly he does this to build his own image in North Korea, but it also gives him a position of strength in dealing with South Korea, with Japan, and with the United States. So um, I mean, how bad, how good is the economy in North Korea? It's almost impossible for anybody outside to really tell. I mean, even if you send a delegation to Pyongyang, you're not going to get a real sense of poverty in rural areas because you're never going to get there. You're never going to see it. And so, it really is almost a political statement by whoever makes the statement of is it good, is it bad? Because there just isn't enough. I don't think there's enough information for his people to determine it, and certainly for an outsider to actually determine the real status of the economy. The fact is that the economy has not failed. I mean, I remember first looking at the North Korea. They're going to starve next month in 1993. And there are some people who are still waiting for that to happen. And so how good or how bad it is, it really is hard to say. So having said that, there is a value for North Korea to maintain this nuclear posture that threatens a retaliation to the United States if the United States tries to threaten North Korea. And certainly in South Korea, there is very much a fear of the North Korean nuclear program, as there is in Japan. And much of that is driving the defense buildup in Japan. And in South Korea, there's a very strong push in today's world to have South Korea develop nuclear weapons, even to the point where there was an article in the last issue of Foreign Affairs by a couple individuals arguing why it's time for South Korea to develop a nuclear weapons program. And part of it is because of the perceived unreliability of the United States and its nuclear umbrella, which has served South Korean defense for so many years, and the fact that North Korea is now entrenched as a nuclear possessor state, that it's time to acknowledge South Korea needs to have that deterrent as well to prevent North Korea from taking advantage of the relationship given its nuclear posture.
Have to take into account the dynamic in South Korea these days. It has been, at least in my observation, a reliable partner for the U.S., or at least it's been dedicated and loyal to the U.S. It's been, you know, stable, but it doesn't seem to be stable now. There's all kinds of trouble going on politically and socially in South Korea. And, when I buy my next Samsung phone, I'm going to have to think about that because I think there are troubles brewing economically in South Korea because of all the political troubles. So where does that fit in all of this? Is that of interest to North Korea? Does Kim Jong Un like that? He likes seeing that. Is Kim Jong Un partly responsible, or maybe largely responsible, for the trouble in South Korea? How does this change the dynamic? How does it change the way they connect or not?
I can't quite figure out how I would say North Korea is responsible for the economic problems in South Korea. Certainly, the fact that South Korea has had to maintain a strong defense posture to prevent an invasion from North Korea, I suppose that's a contributing factor to the problems that are happening. But most of the problems in South Korea, I think, are self-generated problems in terms of social discontent, the politicization of everything between right and left, much like we see in other democracies. So, but certainly for Kim Jong Un, this is good because I think 10, 15 years ago there was very much a sense that South Korea was so overwhelmingly bigger and more the economy was so much bigger than North Korea that there was really just a matter of time before North Korea stopped mattering to the world. And now North Korea does matter. It matters not only to South Korea, but to the rest of the world. As I said, Japan is concerned about it. The United States is concerned about it. China still has a strong interest in maintaining that buffer in North Korea. And Russia has used North Korea as a reliable security partner. So in some ways, what's happened in South Korea has diminished South Korea's position and enhanced North Korea's position in regional affairs.
There was an article in the paper about how North Korean backed hackers stole 1.5 billion American dollars in cryptocurrency from a Dubai based firm. And the FBI reported that. I mean, the new FBI, not the old FBI. I'm not sure what that means. You have to, it's like before and after. This is the after part, the after FBI. And you wonder what that means. You wonder what it means in terms of the FBI learning about it, whether it's true, and the capacity of North Korea to do that. This hacking, it hacked Sony on a movie back, 5 or 10 years ago.
I
That
think
was
that's
really
been more than
impressive.
5 or 10. That's been some time ago. Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Some time ago is even more
Yeah.
interesting because they got in and screwed up Sony, and that means they're capable of getting in and screwing up other countries and other businesses elsewhere. And here, this is Dubai. So, what is the level of their capacity? What is the level? These are people who are starving. Yeah. What is the level of their technological prowess and capacity?
I mean, the reports that I've seen are that North Korea has one of the most sophisticated cyber warfare apparatuses around. That it is well known as a very effective cyber hacker in today's world. And this idea that they've been subsidizing state coffers for some time with stealing Bitcoin. I mean, this is one of the hazards of cryptocurrencies, is that it's very vulnerable to those kinds of people who know how to hack into the system and basically steal. So they're well known for it, and they have a very strong cyber capability in a whole range of areas.
Does this mean that they are hacking into the U.S. too?
I would imagine so. I mean, I know that there have been reports of this happening, and so I'm sure they have. I'm sure South Korea. I mean, if you've ever tried to work with somebody from South Korea, their cyber defense is very strong, to the point where they have to invite you in just to send them an email. And so there is certainly the fear that North Korea's cyber capabilities are good. North Korea's cyber capabilities are strong, and that's why South Korea has built up cyber defenses that they have.
As we discussed earlier, Trump is busy. He's busy domestically, although he spends an awful lot of time on the golf course rather than the Oval Office. There's been a number.
Apparently, yeah.
I hope he's getting good at golf anyway. But he's not paying attention to a lot of things because he's on the golf course and he's doing all this disruption in the U.S. and domestically, and he's doing all this disruption in Europe. But it seems limited to that. I'm not sure if he's all that active in South America, all that active in the global South, and his contribution to the Middle East has been really unsuccessful so far. Although he's got Israel excited about the possibilities with his help, but he hasn't really been involved in Asia very much. Uh, Obama, pivoted to Asia, but then he changed that. Obama dropped the pivot. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that now we have Trump, who's following that same path. He's just not involved with Asia. And to me, Carl, this means that things in Asia, including China's view of Taiwan, including the relative power of these countries, is operating in a vacuum. That is a vacuum without the U.S. Now, that may be what happens all around the world if Trump keeps up his machinations, but it just seems to me that what's going on in Asia is happening without the U.S. there. And it's different if the U.S. isn't there. If the U.S. was there, it would be another kettle of fish. So, what will Trump ever come? Will the U.S. ever come back to Asia, and in what way? And how will that change the paradigm?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's quite fair to say that there's been a ignorance, or I don't think it's fair to say that the United States is ignoring Asia. I mean, what we've seen in some pieces is that Trump is very much trying to disengage in Europe. It's trying to separate itself from the European Union and from NATO and from the longstanding alliance in Asia. But when it comes to Asia, remember what it has said is that the Pentagon is cutting costs, except in the Indo-Pacific, is what the directives have said, suggesting that we have to maintain strong military capability in Asia, and also Taiwan and the Philippines have been exempted from cuts. So, I mean, to the extent that the Trump administration has engaged Asia, it's been very much focused on military capabilities and on very specific uh, capabilities to provide a strong military component to the U.S. presence in Asia. But the big reason again, back to this theme of multipolarity, the big reason the United States is being excluded from Asia is because of its economic policies. That's where China is dominating Asia, and where Asia is saying, well, what is America doing? That's where America is losing the game, if you will, in Asia. Is it's dropped its economic engagement, it's dropped its image as the market of last resort for Asian economies, and China has soaked up all that goodwill by saying we encourage free trade, we encourage trade agreements, regional trade agreements in Asia, and the United States is still floundering around talking about sanctions and talking about taking TSMC away from Taiwan, and all those kinds of things. And so I think what's happening in Asia is your description is correct, that the United States is sort of absent. But what I envision seeing in 2 or 3 years is the United States tries to show a strong military capability in Asia by beefing up its military capacity, its military presence. But there still is this big gaping hole in the economics, and China continues to fill that, and China continues to build its military, which then creates a separate set of problems for the United States in its effort to show that it's the dominant military power.
Maybe my memory is not as good as it was, Carl, but I remember a day not too long ago when the talk was aspirational about North Korea, where people said, maybe someday the US can broker a deal, somebody can broker a deal, they can get together with South Korea and have a reunification. Uh, and also, there was talk about how the US could establish trade relations and cultural relations, what have you, with North Korea and become closer, and have a denouement in terms of the relationship. And if, to the extent it was a pariah, or a rogue state, we could get together with it as we have with South Korea, with Japan, and so forth. Um, but that talk seems to have subsided. It was aspirational at best, but I wonder if any of those possibilities remain, or whether we are now in a place where, for the foreseeable future, there never will be more talk about reunification, and there would never be more talk about an improved, more robust relationship with North Korea.
Well, never is a long time, but I certainly not in the foreseeable future. I think, North Korea in its own propaganda, in its own policy frameworks, has dropped the idea of unification. This was always sort of the basis for all that hope you're talking about, is both South Korea and North Korea had reunification as a fundamental goal for both sides. And North Korea has simply dropped it. They've done symbolic things like smash the roads that used to lead to South Korea, and they've destroyed the facilities that were used to facilitate family visitations and all that. But they've also, in terms of policy itself, they have taken that language out of their policy document. Certainly, that is the case. And again, when you look at North Korea seeing Moscow and Beijing as alternatives to that relationship with the United States, it becomes harder to envision what what the United States has to offer Pyongyang. Ultimately, don't forget what collapsed the deal with Trump was Trump thought that he could create a Disneyland in North Korea too. If that sounds familiar, it's because you saw the thing yesterday where he was handing out pictures about the Gaza Riviera. He had the same vision for North Korea, and that ultimately failed as well. So not everybody wants to have the Riviera on their shore. In North Korea's case, they said no, we aren't really that interested in your casino.
I'm sure not. As the U.S. loses its hegemony in the area, in the world, maybe it becomes more isolationist and so forth. We have less influence, less prospect with a country like that.
Yeah.
But let me ask you the diplomacy question. Suppose I make you forget about Marco Rubio. Let's make it Secretary of State Carl Baker. How's that? Sounds good to me. What kind of position do you take? What do you think the mindset of the country ought to be in dealing with North Korea in this very complex world we have right now under the Trump administration? What should we be thinking? What should we be planning?
Yeah, since you're going to limit my scope to the current administration, it's a little bit difficult to envision anything beyond ignoring it. Because what are you going to do? Are you going to cut a deal with North Korea for its rare earth minerals? Maybe. They do apparently have some deposits in North Korea. So maybe you could figure out how to mine some rare earth minerals out of North Korea in exchange for a reduction of military troops in South Korea. I suppose that's a possibility.
Your point is very well taken. And under this administration, there's not much, in that environment, there's not much you can do. But let's look at a larger view of it and say the next administration, past Marco Rubio, past Trump, knock wood, we should get there soon. The question is, in the long term, what kind of policy should we have with North Korea as it has presently evolved?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're asking me now to ignore the effects of the next 3 years because that becomes complicated, doesn't it? So let's assume that those effects are somewhat neutral, that we just really stay at the ignore it stage, and North Korea continues to build its nuclear weapons. South Korea continues to struggle with its own identity and its own social problems of depopulation, weak economy, and all that. Maybe what we do with North Korea in 2028 is look at what we can do in terms of promoting a unified peninsula. Maybe there's still something to be said for a unified peninsula that is less hostile to the United States and willing to work with the United States on something. Maybe it is extraction of rare earth minerals to feed the semiconductor factories in Seoul. Maybe it is a willingness to share its nuclear technology with South Korea and develop a strong Korea that sits as a bulwark against a more aggressive China. There's so many variables involved with thinking about what do we do 4 years from now that it's kind of hard to tell. Are we going to be up to a point in 2028 where you can still convince North Korea to get rid of its nuclear weapons? I don't think so. I think we're past that. I think that North Korea is maintains nuclear weapons. It feels very secure in maintaining those weapons. It's convinced China and Russia that it's not a problem, that they'll be responsible users. That was always the argument from North Korea. Don't worry, we have nuclear weapons, but we'll be responsible users. So, so North Korea has convinced China and Russia that that's the case. So I don't think you're going to convince North Korea to denuclearize short of a global denuclearization. So I think that what you can do is you can probably in 4 years try to go back and work for Korean unification, because there's still a cultural element of that unification prospect that talks about the grand national unity of all Korean people. And I think that that's a cultural issue for Koreans that won't go away. There's always going to be this sense of Koreanness in the world. So I think that that's something that you might be able to do in 4 years. But it's not, certainly you're not going to develop a US North Korea relationship without having to deal with the implications of that for South Korea and Japan.
Yeah. And one thing is clear, we can't do much at all if we're going to recede into isolationism. But anyway, we'll have to leave it there, Carl. Thank you so much, Carl Baker, Senior Advisor, Pacific Forum. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Global Connections, and we've been discussing the relevance of North Korea in today's global dynamic. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.